Standing before the mirror, I meticulously dressed for my first day at work. The outfit, freshly acquired just yesterday, consisted of sturdy trousers, heavy boots, and a new hard hat. I methodically checked my toolkit, ensuring nothing important was forgotten. Breakfast was a simple affair: strong coffee and toast. As I sipped and chewed, my mind wandered through anticipations of the day ahead. How would I gel with my colleagues? Could I handle the work demands? Leaving my apartment, a flutter of nerves accompanied me. The bus ride to the mine took no more than 20 minutes, but it felt like a journey through different worlds. From the bustling city streets to the open expanses leading to the mining settlement. Upon arrival, a group of miners gathered at the entrance caught my eye. Among them, Edward and Louisa, whom I had met before, stood out. Approaching, I greeted them. Louisa responded with a warm smile, while Edward merely nodded. We engaged in light conversation, waiting for our supervisor to arrive. The surrounding atmosphere was strangely quiet, the usual hustle of the morning strangely subdued. An inexplicable chill ran down my spine as I glanced at the looming mine entrance. The darkness beyond seemed to stare back, an abyss promising more than just physical toil. I shivered, attributing the unease to first-day jitters. However, as we waited, the air grew heavier, as if charged with an unspoken dread. Whispers among the miners spoke of recent strange occurrences within the mine. Unexplained sounds, equipment malfunctions, even fleeting shadows that had no source. Trying to shake off the unease, I focused on the mundane details of my surroundings. The gritty texture of the hard hat in my hands, the smell of earth and machinery oil mingling in the air, the distant clanking of metal on stone echoing faintly from within the mine. Finally, our supervisor arrived, a stern figure who briskly briefed us on the day's tasks. After a thorough safety briefing, I was paired with Louisa as my mentor. It was time to descend into the mine. As we approached the entrance, the massive lift stood like a gateway to another world. We stepped inside, the door clanging shut behind us. As the lift began its descent, Louisa started explaining the workings of the mine. Though I had undergone training, her insights into the nuances of the mine's operations were invaluable. Her voice was steady, a contrast to the slight quiver I felt in my own. The descent was a gradual immersion into darkness. The light from the lift's interior cast eerie shadows on the walls as we descended deeper. I could hear the creaks and groans of the lift cables, a haunting symphony to our descent. With a jolt, the lift came to a stop, and the doors opened to reveal a vast cavern. It was well lit, the artificial lights creating an illusion of safety within the bowels of the earth. Louisa led the way to the equipment storage, her stride confident and practiced. As we geared up, I noticed the cave's vastness, its ceiling lost in shadows. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of earth and metal. The sound of distant machinery and echoing footsteps filled the cavern, a constant reminder of the activity hidden in the mine's labyrinthine passages. We started our walk deeper into the cave, engaging in light conversation. The others in the group chatted casually, their familiarity with the environment evident in their relaxed demeanor. I tried to join in, my attempts at conversation somewhat strained by the surreal setting. The path twisted and turned, leading us through tunnels that felt like the arteries of some ancient, slumbering beast. The walls were rough, occasionally glistening with mineral deposits. The sound of our footsteps and voices bounced off the walls, distorting and melding into the ambient sounds of the mine. As we walked, the light from our headlamps danced on the walls, casting long, wavering shadows. Every so often, a flicker of movement would catch my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing but rock and shadow. Louisa noticed my unease and reassured me, "It's normal to feel a bit on edge down here. The mine has a way of playing tricks on your mind." Despite her words, a sense of foreboding grew within me. The mine felt alive, its silence not empty but expectant, as if waiting for something to stir from its depths. Finally, we reached our designated work area. The space opened up, the machinery and tools laid out ready for use. We began our work, the sound of drilling and hammering echoing through the cavern. I focused on the task at hand, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of the work, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Occasionally, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. The work commenced with Edward methodically setting up the explosives. We all donned our masks and retreated to a safe distance. A muffled explosion rattled through the cavern, followed by a billowing cloud of dust. We waited patiently for the dust to settle before returning to the site. For the next few hours, our routine was unvarying. Sorting and loading the ore, the work was monotonous, but not without its rhythm. Gradually, I began to acclimate to the cadence of the mine, the sound of metal against rock becoming a familiar backdrop. During short breaks, we began to converse more freely. Louisa shared stories about her life, her voice echoing softly in the cavernous space. Edward, on the other hand, remained an enigma, sharing little and keeping to himself. It was during one of these breaks that we heard a sudden shout from a nearby tunnel. Exchanging puzzled looks, we decided to investigate. As we approached the source of the commotion, we saw a group of miners huddled together, peering down at something. Drawing closer, we discovered the object of their attention. A large, white, spherical object, about the size of a small dog. It resembled an egg, but it was far too large for any bird. The miners around us were equally baffled. One of the miners explained that they found it after blasting through a section of rock. It had somehow survived the explosion intact, an enigma in itself. Curiosity piqued, I reached out and carefully picked up the object. It was surprisingly light and warm to the touch, its surface smooth and almost pearlescent. The idea of it being a dinosaur egg crossed my mind, but that seemed far too fantastical. Yet, what else could it be? As I turned the object over in my hands, I impulsively brought it close to my ear. To my utter shock, I heard a faint but distinct heartbeat. A jolt of fear surged through me, and I nearly dropped the mysterious egg. I relayed my discovery to the others, and we collectively decided that it was imperative to bring this find to the surface. Just as we were discussing how to transport it safely, the ground beneath us trembled violently. A sudden earthquake struck, sending us scrambling for cover. Rocks and debris clattered down around us, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Thankfully, the epicenter seemed to be elsewhere, and we were spared from any major cave-ins. In the wake of the tremor, we quickly regrouped and conducted a roll call. Fortuitously, everyone was accounted for and unharmed. The lights flickered ominously above us but thankfully remained lit. Our immediate concern was the ventilation system, which, to our relief, was still functioning, circulating fresh air through the dusty tunnels. Gathering our wits, we decided to head towards the exit, not forgetting the mysterious egg, now in the possession of a miner named Dave. As we ascended, we navigated through the minor destruction left in the earthquake's wake, the atmosphere thick with tension and unspoken fears. Our steady progress was abruptly halted when we reached the path leading to the lift. A heart-sinking realization hit us. The way was blocked by rubble. Panic flickered in the eyes of my companions, a mirror to my own rising dread. Edward, the most seasoned among us, stepped forward to calm the group. His voice, steady and reassuring, was a lighthouse in the storm of our collective anxiety. As we stood there, assessing the situation, several more miners from adjacent tunnels joined us, including our foreman. A second roll call was conducted, a routine tinged with urgency. It was then we discovered the unsettling truth. Someone was missing. Our foreman, with a tone of command, swiftly organized us into two teams. While one would work on clearing the debris, the other, which included Louisa, Dave, and myself, was tasked with searching for the missing miner. Dave, still clutching the egg with a protective grip, seemed reluctant to part with it. The egg, now a silent participant in our ordeal, added an otherworldly element to the already tense situation. Receiving our instructions, we set off, our headlamps cutting through the darkness, casting long shadows on the rough walls. The silence of the tunnels was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the distant, muffled efforts of the team working to clear the blocked exit. As we ventured deeper into the mine, the dim lighting and cramped spaces made the search increasingly challenging. Each turn and each new tunnel brought a mix of hope and apprehension. The missing miner could be just around the next bend, or we could be walking further into a labyrinth with no easy way out. The egg, cradled in Dave's arms, seemed almost to pulsate in the dim light, its surface gleaming oddly. I couldn't help but feel a certain unease towards it. an irrational fear that it was somehow connected to our predicament. Louisa, ever the voice of reason, kept us focused on the task at hand. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the eerie surroundings and the growing sense of foreboding that enveloped us. We checked every possible space, calling out for the missing miner, the sound of our voices echoing eerily in the vast, empty tunnels. With each passing minute, the weight of the mine seemed to press down on us, a tangible reminder of the danger we were in. The search felt endless, a repetitive cycle of hope and disappointment. We traversed through familiar and unfamiliar paths, each one indistinguishable from the last in the disorienting darkness. In the dimly lit tunnel, our search took a harrowing turn when we heard a faint groan. We rushed towards the sound, hearts pounding with a mix of dread and urgency. There, partially buried under rubble, were several miners, alive but injured. We sprang into action, carefully removing the debris to free them. The task was arduous, our hands working frantically against time. Sweat and dust mingled on our brows as we lifted rocks and debris with trembling hands. Finally, we pulled the last miner to safety, their expressions a blend of pain and relief. We quickly transitioned to administering first aid. My hands, now smeared with blood, worked mechanically, applying bandages and pressure to wounds. It was then that I noticed Dave, after tying a bandage, reaching for the egg again. His hands, stained with blood, brushed against the egg's surface, which seemed to quiver in response. A chill ran down my spine as I observed the egg appearing to absorb the blood, its surface pulsating subtly. Astonishingly, Dave seemed oblivious to this eerie phenomenon. I voiced my observation, a tremor in my words betraying my fear. Dave dismissed it as stress-induced hallucination, his attention firmly fixed on the egg. I wanted to argue, to make him see the unnerving change, but the urgency of our situation forced me to shelve my concerns. With a wounded miner leaning on each of our shoulders, we began our slow and cautious journey back through the tunnel. Dave, still cradling the enigmatic egg, followed behind. The passage was eerily quiet, save for the labored breathing of the injured and the soft scuffle of our boots on the rocky ground. As we navigated the labyrinthine tunnels, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on us. Each step was a painful reminder of our precarious position, deep within the Earth's embrace. The flickering lights cast ominous shadows, transforming the familiar paths into a maze of uncertainty. It was then, amidst the oppressive silence, that I realized something was amiss. The sound of footsteps behind us had ceased. I turned around, expecting to see Dave, but he was gone. The tunnel where he had been just moments before was empty, the egg along with him. Panic surged through me, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and confusion. I called out his name, my voice echoing through the tunnels, met only with silence. Louisa, supporting the less injured miner, looked back, her eyes wide with concern. Fear gripped my heart, but determination pushed me forward. While Louisa tended to the injured, I ventured back into the labyrinthine tunnels to search for Dave. The dim, flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls as I walked, each step heavy with apprehension. After navigating a series of turns, I caught sight of a figure in the distance. It was Dave, standing with his back to me, the egg cradled in his arms. I called out to him, my voice echoing off the walls. He turned slowly, the egg held out in front of him. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the egg. His expression, one of hypnotic trance. Suddenly, a crackling sound pierced the silence. I watched in horror as cracks began to spider across the surface of the egg. It trembled violently, shifting from side to side. My heart raced as I realized that something was about to emerge. The top of the eggshell broke off, and from within, a grotesque creature emerged. It resembled a dog or a wolf, but bore disturbingly human or rat-like features. The creature stretched languidly, a chilling intelligence in its gaze as it surveyed its surroundings. First, its eyes locked with mine. Fear rooted me to the spot, and I stumbled backward, falling onto the ground. Then, it turned its head towards Dave, who remained transfixed, his gaze never leaving the monster. The creature opened its mouth impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. In one swift, horrifying motion, it engulfed Dave's head and began to gnaw with a sickening crunch. Dave's body stood momentarily before collapsing to the ground, lifeless. Panic surged through me, adrenaline fueling my escape. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, my breath ragged, heart pounding in my chest. The tunnels seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn a disorienting maze. Finally, I reached Louisa and the injured miners. Without uttering a word, I grabbed the wounded miner and hurried them towards the exit. Louisa, alarmed and confused, asked about Dave. Gasping for breath, I managed to utter that he was dead and that we needed to flee. She tried to question me further, but I was too shaken to explain. My words stumbled out incoherently, my terror evident. I insisted we would discuss it once we were safe, my mind still reeling from the nightmarish encounter. Upon reaching the debris where our team was working, several miners rushed to assist us with the injured. Exhausted and shaken, I collapsed to the ground, trying to process the surreal horror I had just witnessed. The foreman approached, concern etched on his face, and I blurted out that Dave was dead. But before I could say more, the crowd parted, and to my utter disbelief, Dave appeared, whole and unharmed. My mind reeled in confusion and terror. The image of the monstrous creature and Dave's supposed death clashed with the reality in front of me. Was what I witnessed in the tunnel a hallucination? A trick of the mind fueled by fear and stress? Or was there a more sinister explanation to Dave's impossible reappearance? Terror gripped me as I stood before the group, Dave's gaze boring into me. Nobody else seemed to notice, but I could swear I saw a sinister smirk on his face. My first instinct was to run, to escape the unnerving stare of this man who I was sure was no longer Dave. Gathering courage, I recounted the events at the egg's location, explaining Dave's gruesome end. Louisa stood by me, corroborating my story. The foreman, perplexed yet concerned, decided that we needed to investigate the site. Edward agreed to accompany us. As we prepared to leave, Dave volunteered to join. I protested in horror, but the foreman, urging calm, allowed him to come along. I led the way, my legs shaking, constantly glancing back at Dave. Each time our eyes met, he gave me a subtle, unnerving squint. His gaze held a terrifying secret, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was leading us into a trap. Rational thoughts battled with my intuition. Perhaps I was suffering from gas inhalation, or the earthquake had caused some sort of hallucination. But deep down, something primal screamed for me to flee. Upon reaching the site, we found unmistakable traces of blood. Pointing to the spot, I reiterated my account. The foreman turned to Dave, bombarding him with questions. Dave's responses were short and strained, as if speaking was a labor. Edward then stepped forward, asking Dave about a conversation they supposedly had in a bar the previous night. Dave's response was a mumbled, incoherent mess. Suddenly, his face contorted in rage, and he let out an unnatural howl, his body beginning to morph into a horrific wolf-like creature. The monster lunged at the foreman, its teeth sinking into his throat. Paralyzed with fear, I felt certain death was imminent, when suddenly Edward grabbed my arm and yanked me away. Snapping back to reality, we ran for our lives, the sounds of the foreman's struggle echoing behind us. The tunnels became a blur as we sprinted, the terror of the monstrous Dave propelling us forward. My mind raced with fear and confusion. The creature, the egg, and now this transformation. What were we dealing with? Were we trapped in some sort of nightmare? Gasping for breath, my mind racing with terror, I trailed behind Edward, realizing with dread that we weren't heading towards the main exit, but rather into an uncharted direction of the mine. My voice, strained with fear, echoed in the narrow tunnel. "Where are we running to?" Edward's response sent a shiver down my spine. "We can't risk leading it to the others. It's too dangerous." We hastened our steps, dodging fallen debris and navigating through the labyrinthine tunnels. The dim lighting barely illuminated our path, casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to dance around us. Finally, Edward stopped abruptly in front of an old, rusted hatch. With a grunt of effort, he wrenched it open, revealing a gaping abyss below, a forgotten shaft, its depths swallowed by darkness. Edward positioned himself strategically opposite the opening, his eyes fixed on the ominous void. "The plan," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is to stand our ground and sidestep at the last moment when it attacks. We'll use its momentum against it." I glanced at the open hatch, my heart pounding against my ribs. This was like a scene straight out of a horror film, yet here we were, staging a real-life standoff against an unimaginable terror. The air grew thick with tension as we awaited the creature's arrival. The sound of its labored breathing grew louder, accompanied by the heavy, irregular beat of its footsteps. It emerged from around the corner, moving with a deliberate, predatory grace. Its twisted smile was a grotesque display of pleasure, relishing the trap it had sprung. Frozen in terror, we watched as the creature prepared to strike. Suddenly, with a ferocious speed, it lunged towards us. Edward's reflexes were lightning fast as he shoved me aside, narrowly evading the creature's deadly grasp. The beast, missing its target, soared past us but managed to graze Edward's arm with its claw-like hand. He teetered on the brink of the pit. Instinctively, I lunged forward, grabbing his pants and yanking him back to safety. From the depths of the pit, a haunting howl reverberated, echoing our own fears. I quickly glanced at Edward's arm and saw blood oozing from a deep gash, the fabric of his shirt torn. He clenched his teeth, covering the wound with his other hand. But there was no time to tend to it properly. We had to keep moving. With renewed urgency, we dashed towards the exit, our footsteps echoing in the now eerily silent tunnels. We made it to the rubble pile. Louisa was there, her face etched with worry. Seeing us alone, she asked about the foreman. Our silent, grim expressions conveyed the tragic news. Her face crumpled in horror and disbelief. Without wasting another moment, we ushered her towards the elevator. The urgency was palpable. Every second counted. Inside, the survivors sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a myriad of emotions: fear, relief, shock. As the elevator began its ascent, I took one last glance at the tunnel. My blood turned to ice as I saw the creature clawing its way out of the shaft, its eyes burning with a malevolent rage. I screamed at the operator to move faster. Edward, with a sense of finality, slammed the cage door shut. The creature's howl, a blend of anger and frustration, followed us as we ascended. Reaching the surface was surreal. The open sky, the fresh air felt like a different world compared to the darkness below. Everyone disembarked in silence, their relief palpable, yet overshadowed by the horror of what lay beneath. Edward, with a resolute expression, took the remaining explosives and placed them carefully in the elevator. His hands, steady despite the injury, set the timer. With one final nod, he sent the elevator back down into the depths. Moments later, the ground shuddered beneath our feet as a thunderous explosion echoed through the mine, followed by the rumbling collapse of the shaft. Dust and debris billowed up from the entrance, a stark testament to the finality of our actions. I collapsed onto the ground, my body and mind succumbing to the exhaustion and shock. Around me, I could hear the faint cries and murmurs of my fellow survivors, each lost in their own relief and trauma. My eyes gazed blankly at the sky, trying to reconcile the day's nightmarish events. It was supposed to be just my first day at work, a new beginning. Instead, it turned into a harrowing fight for survival, an encounter with an unspeakable horror from the depths below.